Sometimes I have a lot more fondness to the more flawed and unloved movies than I do the heralded and celebrated. There's something about discovering a film no one talks about, and if they do, it might not be that praised. And then you watching it, loving it, and thinking, what's everyone else's problem? There's been many movies I've been near the sole defender for, and trying to explain their appeal. While not all films on this list were critical flops, the ones that aren't, for whatever reason, I feel have been overlooked and should be talked more about. So here's my personal top 10 most underrated movies. Number 10, Miami Vice. I have a great admiration for 2000s era Michael Mann, and while Collateral is the clear crown jewel of his output during that time period, not enough light gets shown on this film. One of Collateral's best qualities land its way in this film and is enhanced, that being the heavily digitalised, noisy and nocturnal cinematography in which the film is photographed. Michael Mann captures nightlife in this film like no other filmmaker. It feels so real and tangible, yet atmospheric and cinematic. The colours and texture of the streetlights, buildings and skyscrapers all roughly bleed into one another, almost creating a hyperreal, hallucinogenic look that strangely paradoxically feels very grounded. The extremely idiosyncratic aesthetic makes for a truly hypnotic viewing experience that makes the film worth watching, which is pretty vital as the film's characters and story are completely expendable. It's a film I really don't care what is happening, and I never really have. But regardless, I've watched it a few times now, as the film is just a vibe that just washes over me. Number 9, The Counselor. Okay, I'm definitely raising some eyebrows and turning away a lot of people with this pick. This film seemed like it was destined for greatness with its all-star cast, respected director and writer combo, that being directed by the great Ridley Scott and written by Mr. Nihilism himself, Cormac McCarthy, who wrote such feel-good novels such as The Road and No Country for Old Men. Yeah, it fell on its face when it was released and went on to be a commercial and critical flop. But I don't know, for me this cold, unforgiving and pulpy crime story has a lot to like. Cormac's dialogue you're either on board with or you ain't, but it really tickles my fancy. I get aroused out of his song-like wordplay his characters deliver. And about the characters themselves, they're portrayed in a myriad of joyful performances. I love Javier Bardem's aged party boy persona. I get a rise out of Cameron Diaz's updated femme fatale scenery-chewing performance. And even Brad Pitt's deluded sage-like cowboy character is very memorable. Speaking of memorable, there's a death scene in this film which is one of the most horrifically brutal I've seen in a mainstream Hollywood film in some time. It's truly shocking when it happens and sticks with me long after I've seen it. This film is definitely not for everyone and the reception towards it proves it, but there's dozens of us that really like it and you might be added to that very exclusive fan base if you check it out. Number 8, Natural Born Killers. Oliver Stone's coke-fueled 80s and 90s filmography is something else, and this film is the most batshit out of all of them, which is saying something. To say this is a critique to the sensationalist aspects of the media in terms of then glamorising serial killers would be putting it lightly. The film's extremely excessive and claustrophobic style creates a warped, nightmarish mirror on the visual representation of serial killers, and how these sick and disturbed people are often publicised in a rock star-like fashion, and grow a very strange fan base with it. A trend which is very much alive with the success of Netflix's Tiger King and the online reaction to it. But yeah, the film is kind of a very entertaining thrill ride. The film is very funny with hysterical supporting performances from the likes of Robert Downey Jr. and Tommy Lee Jones, who have both never been this animated. The original script was written by Quentin Tarantino, but Oliver Stone clearly made its own, and it's a fascinating look at how a director can completely change an already auteur-driven source material. I've had many problems with the media in terms of how they represent dangerous and horrific things and how sensationalist they can be. And the ludicrous takedown, which this film pretty much is of that institution, is a joy to watch, and I agree with many of its assessments. Number 7, The Neon Demon. Winding Refn's vampirical look into the fashion world of LA is more than an exercise in style, as some critics would say. Even though the style the film is presented is potently alluring and seductive, which fits the theme of the film, its opinions on the flacidness yet danger on the morals and codes the people in the fashion industry abide by in this film are at times ludicrous yet compelling. Refn's near whole filmography was always about violent men and the fragility of masculinity, so it's refreshing to see him turn the tables and look at toxic femininity with a Dario Argento-inspired, very theatrical way. The director's talent for orchestrating memorable ensemble casts for his films is often overlooked, and same goes here. The film's lead, Elle Fanning, delivers her strongest performance and projects her character's growth, or descent in what way you look at it, from pure innocence to self-aggrandizing narcissism really well. Jenna Malone as the obsessive yet jealous mentor is good, and Keanu Reeves takes a break from his likeable persona, playing a strangely convincing scummy motel owner. But the star here is the director, and he knows it. To me, he's one of the only directors working today where he could turn the sound off his films and still have a good idea of what's happening, unlike most of his peers. He tells the story through his visuals, which is the foundation which film is built on, and considering how baffling yet thought-provoking the story is, I find it a very commendable piece of work. Number 6, Jarhead. With Sam Mendes making his lauded new World War I film 1917, I hope people reach back into his past works and take a second look at his Gulf War film, which in many ways is the other side of 1917's coin. Where his last film depicts the horror and tension of combat in war, Jarhead looks at what happens when you delay the gratification of warfare and the boredom, loneliness and psychological warfare that sets in when you sit around in the desert day after day waiting for something to happen after months of training. It's such an original war movie, being one that has barely any war in it. It's not completely tension derived though, as the tension is placed in the internalized struggle of its characters. Jake Gyllenhaal, who I find is one of the finest actors working today, delivers a hugely underrated performance who only finds the constant looming threat that never comes to be more maddening as the film goes on. Mendes' consistent cinematography collaborator Roger Deakins does his usual incredible work. The film's golds, brown and yellow colour palette looks wonderful, his simplistic yet perfect framing is on point, and the set pieces with the burning oil rigs contain some of his strongest photography work. I actually recommend this film to people who might not be into war movies, as the film doesn't engage in the usual conventions of the genre, which sets it apart from every other war film I've seen, and the film deserves a reassessment. Number 5, Killing Them Softly. This pitch-black neo-noir is novelistic in structure and cynical in its messaging. It creates a parallel to the violence-infused lives of low-stature criminals, stealing whatever they can out of each other's pockets, and coldly arranging the deathly consequences of those doings, and the political fallout of the financial crisis of 2008. The film is basically an allegory for the danger and cutthroat nature of capitalism, told through a crime story, and the film is not really subtle with its critical nature of the system, which probably turns some people off. But I think representing the criminal underworld in this pathetic, eroding and unglamorous way, with every character's negotiating robberies and hits in a very clinical and transactional way, creates this really filthy, soulless yet probably realistic type of crime film, which, as a huge fan of crime films in general, I really enjoy what this film is going for. The film is worth watching for its weighty all-star cast featuring Brad Pitt, James Gandolfini, Ray Liotta and Richard Jenkins, who are all great, and the film creates such a thick, unappealing atmosphere in its brisk 90 minutes. Also, Pitt's meditative monologue that closes the film is damning and cuts pretty deep. Number 4, Traffic. Now this is kind of stretching the term underrated, as this film was praised at the time of its release, but it's one of those award-winning films that time's forgotten, and I never hear it mentioned being the near masterwork in director Steven Soderbergh's eclectic movie catalogue. Its study on the war on drugs with its serialised 3 stories taking place in LA, Washington and Mexico respectively, and how all the characters in the 3 stories unknowingly impact one another is a powerful watch. Fans of the TV show The Wire will find a lot to enjoy, as with its focus on the faults of cinematic industries and the consequences it has on a large scale. The film's scope is lofty, as it attempts to be a cathartic statement on the unresolvability of the war on drugs in America, and the undefeatable nature of it, which I think it sticks its landing. Soderbergh's skill of storytelling through technical technique is evident more than ever in this film, as each story is filmed with distinguishable colour palette and style that keeps the plot comprehensible, which is a benefit as there are many plot gears turning with constant setups and payoffs overbranching from one story to another. Benicio del Toro steals the show with a wonderfully restrained yet revealing performance, which earned him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Which leads me back to my first point, that while this film was praised at the time, that praise seemingly faded as time went by, and I'm not sure why. Number 3, War of the Worlds. Spielberg's post-9/11 phase, which started with Minority Report and ended with Munich, is perhaps the most interesting era of his career. To see the most iconic film director in history be this impacted by the terrorist attack, and go from the magical enchantment of his past films to these dark and paranoid-filled thrillers, it's very evident the uncertainty of the time found its way to his films, and his remake of War of the Worlds shows that in spades. In the history of the alien invasion subgenre, never has the invasion been depicted this horrifically and a matter of fact. The sequences of the tripods airing their death silent and evaporating thousands of people is genuinely quite scary, and the destructive scenic aftermath of the attacks clearly call back to the images of the attack on the towers. Spielberg has always been a master of suspense and thrills, and in the film's first 2 acts he gives the goods by these spellbindingly well done invasion scenes that inspire awe as they do fear. I love how ground level the film feels, as with so many other alien invasion films, we're constantly cutting away to president offices, science laboratories and military meetings, which kinda sucks the relatability of the apocalyptic event. Where with this, from beginning to end, you're just stuck with this average middle class family just trying to survive by any means, which makes it so much more engaging and panic inducing as you get to question what the hell you would do in a situation like this. People rag on the film for its 3rd act, and yes, it does bring it down from being top tier, but I don't think it ruins the film by any stretch, and the ending itself is kind of the purpose of the whole story, so if you don't like the story it's telling, it just isn't for you. Number 2, Letters from Iwo Jima. Again, this was praised when it came out, but I find this to be underrated as I regard this as one of the greatest war films ever made, where with most people it's entirely left out of that conversation. What Clint Eastwood did with this film and its counter film, Flags of Our Fathers, which is also really good, will never be replicated this well, I don't think. With each respective film from the POV of both sides of the same battle, with this film depicting the Japanese side, which makes it a more rewarding watch as not many war films concentrate on the perceived quote-unquote enemy of the war. The film's greatest strength is humanising these often demonised Japanese soldiers, and conveying that a lot of the soldiers were also just scared and frightened human beings. War films often take a very one-dimensional us versus them stance, where war is almost always a more ambiguous affair. Eastwood took a brave and confident stance, not only being a fair study of Japanese soldiers during World War II in a big-budget Hollywood production, but casting all Japanese actors and letting them speak their native language all the way through the film, which is very commendable, this being highlighted by Ken Watanabe's star-making performance as the humanistic, sympathetic general. The film dives into the usual war is hell affair, but is a lot more relentless and exhausting than most. Once the Americans land on the beaches of Iwo Jima at the end of the first act, the film becomes more and more hard to watch. You're neither cheering or booing anyone. It's a lot more mature than that, and no other film captures the shades of grey morals and destructibility of the war than this. Number 1, Lost Highway. Wildly misunderstood when it came out, David Lynch's Lost Highway has accumulated a loyal cult fanbase, but still fails to be recognised as one of the best films of the 90s, which this is, in my opinion, is in contention with. As well as being one of the most brilliant psychological thrillers ever made. This psychoanalysis of what a person must go through to get past being a killer is an all-consuming puzzle box of a movie. It's certainly hard to grasp on a first watch, like most of Lynch's high-concept thrillers, but Lynch gives you enough crumb trails to have enough intrigue to return to the film, even if you were initially too bewildered by it on a first watch, which happened to me. The first 30 to 40 minutes is some of the most eerie and atmospheric horror filmmaking ever put to screen. I'm talking Shining levels level of creep. The scene at the party with the introduction of the mystery man could be its own short film, it's so strong. But then the movie's famous narrative switch, that will initially confuse first viewers, ends up ascending the story into an absurdist dreamlike meditation on what someone has to do to psychologically rewrite themselves to bear with the guilt that plagues them after having done something terrible. Apparently the initial inspiration for Lynch to write this film was the O.J. Simpson trials, and the film starts to make a lot more sense if you bear this in mind. To me this is Lynch's scariest and funniest film, and how he manages to pull off these tonal switches so well, I'll never fully understand. And to be honest, I'll never understand how Lynch comes up with these ideas so far out the box. It takes a mind that must be firing on all cylinders creatively to come up with this film. Is it a work of genius? I'm not too sure. Is it one of those underrated films in the mainstream? Absolutely.